Well, hello everyone. I want to welcome you to my English 1020 final exam review video. And in this video, I will be talking about the upcoming final exam and giving you important information about it. You can follow along with me by going to Content. You would click on that up toward the top of our Brightspace course page, and then in the left-hand sidebar, look for Final Exam Materials, and that's where you'll find both this sheet that I'm going to talk about right now, the Final Exam Review Sheet, and the Final Exam Practice Run Sheet that I'll be discussing in a separate video. So, you will need to take our final exam before 11:59 p.m. on Monday, May 3rd. And so the exam will be open to you from 8 o'clock a.m. that morning on Monday, May 3rd until 11:59 p.m. And it will close promptly at 11:59 p.m. on Monday the 3rd. If you have not taken it by that time, you will receive a 0. And if you haven't finished it by that time, then it will just be unfortunate. You won't be able to submit it. So we have very strict rules there about the final exams. You want to make sure that you get your exam in on time because instructors have very strict grading deadlines that we have to meet during the week of final exams. And that's why we have to be very, very strict about those deadlines. Exams will not be accepted late at all unless you can provide documented proof of a true emergency. And I mean, we're talking a big time true emergency, like you're in the hospital at death's door. And even then, that's a difficult process. So make sure you get it in. The final exam for English 1020 is the same for all sections. And it consists of a very short story or perhaps an excerpt from a somewhat longer story that you will read, that we will give you. And that story or excerpt chosen is generally not, as I say, very long. It might be 3-4 pages max. And then after the story, you'll be given a prompt question. And your job will be to write a paragraph, one paragraph, in response to that prompt after reading through the story very carefully. And the exam is always administered cold. I'm going to talk about that here in just a moment. But that means that you will not see the actual text that you're going to be writing about until you take the final. And we, instructors, do not even know yet exactly what that text choice is going to be. Note that you may use your Little Seagull handbook, and I would strongly encourage you to do that as you're writing. And it would be a good idea to go to the chapter on MLA citation, and it's the green tabs, and to refresh your memory on MLA a little bit before you start taking the exam. There's a sample paper at the very end of this chapter that begins on page 161, and it has little places in the margin here that explain to you how your heading is supposed to look, and that gives you examples of various in-text citations. And then at the end of the paper, it has a sample works cited page that contains all kinds of various citations and shows you how to create those works cited entries. And then, of course, there are sections in this chapter that show you various models for in-text citation sources, various models for works cited entries. So just use this book as you're writing to help you remember how to create these citations. And we're going to talk about that in a little more depth here in just a moment. I encourage you very much to read the footnotes, if there are any, in this short excerpt that you'll be reading, or this short story, because they will help you understand wording in the text with which you may not be familiar. And so read the footnotes. And also, if you come across a word in the story that you do not understand, look it up. Look it up in an online dictionary or, whatever means that you have to do that. So as I mentioned a moment ago, this exam for 1020, which is the same across the board for all 1020 students, is always administered cold. And that is to say that students do not see the actual text that they're writing about or the prompt question that directs that writing until they take the final exam. We will spend review time this week looking at a past 1020 final exam, text and prompt, and I encourage you to try your hand at actually writing a response, a paragraph, to this practice text. And so, as I said, to locate that final exam practice run, you would go to Content, and you would then go to Final Exam Materials, and then look for the English 1020 practice run. I'm also doing a separate video about that, and so it will help you tremendously to read over that document and watch my video. And so the information that you'll get there is critical, just like the information here in this video. You should submit your little practice run paragraph as the week 15 discussion board posting no later than Wednesday night, the 28th of April at 11:59 p.m., which is always the way it's been throughout the semester. That's when your initial discussion board postings are always due, as you know. And that gives me time to give you direct feedback on this practice exam and let you know where you've hit the mark and where you're off the mark. And also submitting the practice run there counts as your week 15 discussion board grade. So there are two very good reasons why you need to submit that little practice run posting. The good news about only writing a paragraph is that, obviously you're not writing an entire paper. But the bad news is you only have one paragraph in which to get this right. And if you mess it up, then, you've messed it up. So there's sort of good news and bad news there. Here are the specifics for this exam. You want to double space your paper, which is standard for college writing. You want to type in 12-point Times New Roman font, also standard. And you want to have a standard heading in MLA formatting, just as we've been doing all semester long, at the top of your paper in the left-hand corner. And I've given you on the sheet how it should look. So your name, my name, the class name, and then the date in MLA formatting. Put the date in MLA formatting or you will get points deducted. And then if you continue your short paragraph on a second page, you may or may not do that. But if you do find yourself doing that, be sure that you place your last name and the page number in the upper right-hand corner. And again, I've shown you on the sheet here how to do that. You want to include a brief title on page 1 centered in the middle of the page, just after your formal heading there. Your title doesn't have to be fancy in this case. For example, it could just state the purpose of your paper, so it might say something like a character analysis or an analysis of whatever, right? So it doesn't have to be anything fancy. So here is where this exam is a bit different from writing a traditional essay. You want to treat this paragraph that you're writing like a body paragraph. Make sure you get that, because part of the grading depends on that. So in other words, there's no hook. There's no introductory hook that serves as your first sentence. There's no introductory information. Rather, you leap right in with a topic sentence. And in that very first topic sentence, you must include the author's name and the title of the piece that you're writing about. If in your first sentence you do not have the author's name and the title, then points are deducted. So remember too that short story titles are always placed in quotation marks. They are not placed in italics. I am continually amazed that students cannot get that rule straight because it's so simple once you memorize it and get it in your head and it will save you point deductions in everything you write. So the rule is that pieces that are shorter works, that are not long works or large works, like a poem or a short story, those titles are placed in quotation marks, but longer works like a book title or a film title, they're always placed in italics without any quotation marks. So get that rule in your head. Obviously, this is going to be a short story, so the title is going to be put in quotation marks. Think of that very first sentence in this response paragraph, that topic sentence, almost like a little mini thesis. So as stated above, you have to include the author's last name and the title of the short story in that very first sentence. But you should also answer the prompt question in that first sentence as well. So it's really, that first little sentence is just boom, the thesis. And that's very different from everything else that we normally do. And it's because you're only writing just the one paragraph that we leap right into it. The best way to format this first sentence is to just regurgitate, and that's a real fancy word for vomit back up, sorry, the question or the prompt in the form of a statement, right? And that's also a good little trick to use in a lot of college writing where you have a prompt. So here's an example. Let's say that your prompt question is as follows. Read the short story below entitled A Day in the Life of Joe Smith by Sam Brown, and then in a well-developed paragraph describe 2 character traits of Joe Smith. So let's imagine that after reading that short story about this character named Joe Smith, sorry, I'm not being very creative here, you are realizing that he seems to be an angry, selfish sort of character. And you're seeing textual evidence from Joe Smith's own words and actions and thoughts within that story and other characters' responses back to him that let you know that he indeed is pretty angry and selfish. And so here's how your very first sentence would look. In the short story, quotations, A Day in the Life of Joe Smith, in quotations, and note that that comma goes inside those quotation marks there. By Sam Brown, comma again, one may see that Joe Smith is an angry and selfish character. So you've just gone straight to it. You've given us the title, the author's name, and you've given us your little thesis. You've named off the 2 character traits that you're finding in this character of Joe Smith, right? Now, when we think about character traits, we've said this before. Characters in fiction are much like real living human beings. They're patterned after real living human beings. And so they're richly human if they're well-rounded and dynamic characters. And that means that they're not going to probably be totally good, but then they may not be totally evil either, because there aren't too many people in the world who accomplish either one of those things. They're kind of a mixture of good traits and maybe some traits that don't quite meet the mark there. And so a character can be angry and mean-spirited and self-centered and egotistical, or a character could also be kind and generous and thoughtful. A character could be shy, timid, afraid. A character could be loud and boisterous. Or a character may have a mixture of, both a positive and a negative trait. So think about the traits in that sort of a manner. So the paragraph that you write should contain about 10 to 12 substantial sentences. So note that word substantial. So not little tiny short sentences, but normal size sentences, or around 250 words. Now, no one is going to actually count the words, but we've gotten very skilled over the years at eyeballing these paragraphs and at knowing when a student is really close to 250 words and when a student is well under that. So get close, and there's probably a feature as you're typing that can show you your word count. I know my computer will do that. So even though no one's going to count your words to make sure you got exactly 250, we're going to eyeball it and we're going to know if you're fairly close. And you should nevertheless try to adhere to that guideline for length, since if you're really under that, then you're going to get some point deductions. You want to use formal academic language, just like in all of our papers. So do not use first person I or me. Do not use that. This is formal academic writing. Do not use second person, you or your or yours. Do not do that. Unless, of course, those words are part of a quote that you're using, obviously. But you want to use one or ones instead. And you also want to avoid these vague, informal words like thing. Define what the thing is. Stuff, words like that. You want your language to feel formal and professional. You don't want it to feel conversational. And not adhering to that guideline will certainly cost you points. So after you've written that first topic sentence, you then want to develop your paragraph with details and analysis, responding directly to that question that's asked of you in the prompt. And while we will not know the exact text or the exact prompt question until the exam happens, I can tell you that most 1020 final exams focus on character. That's the element that they will focus on. And the question prompt may ask you to define maybe a couple of qualities or traits or characteristics of a certain character in this story, as in the example that I just gave you with Joe Smith. You would then need to back up those ideas with actual evidence from the story itself. Then, alternatively, the question might be about some literary term in addition that we've used. So, for example, the prompt might ask you to describe the character's moment of epiphany. And if you remember from our past documents and the exam on literary terms, that's a term that refers to the aha moment of a character, when a character realizes just what life is really all about or what truly matters most to him or to her. And so the prompt question could also be structured to ask you maybe what seems ironic in this story. And so, if you think of irony, it's sort of something unexpected that goes directly in opposition to what you thought was going to happen. So if you remember the old Alanis Morissette song, I realize that's before your time, called Isn't It Ironic? She, within the song lyric, talks about a guy who has a fear of flying in an airplane, and he's terrified all of his life about doing that, and then finally he gets up the courage to decide to get on board a plane and fly, and the plane crashes. So therein is some irony. But more often than not, the question on the 1020 final concerns a character analysis. So what sort of person is this character? Name off 2 traits or attributes of this character. That's generally how the question will present itself. You have to quote at least one time from the text that we're reading in the final in the body of the paragraph you're writing to back up your main idea as stated in your topic sentence. However, you can quote more than once if you want to. You could quote twice. But you want to make sure that you cite just after the quote with the author's last name and the page number in parentheses. If you fail to cite, you have some major points deducted. So you've got to do that. So for example, if the author's last name is Smith and you're using a quote from page 2, on your accompanying sheet here, I've shown you how that would look. So you have your quote, the end of your quote, and then in parentheses, Smith 2, end quote, period. There is no page included in an MLA in-text citation. There's no letter P for page, right? There's no comma between the author's last name and the page number. It's just parentheses, author's last name, the actual page number, the end parenthesis, and then your period. In MLA, your period will not come at the end of the quote. It will not. No comma will be there. You'll get marked down if you put a comma there at the end of the quote. It comes at the end of your sentence now, and only the period, right after your in-text citation. So get that rule into your head to make sure that you don't have points deducted. And note that the page numbers will probably likely appear on the text that you're given, but if they do not, just count them page 1, page 2, etc. Remember not to drop your quote, because big time points will be deducted for that error, and especially since it's only one paragraph that you're writing. So do not do that. Remember that you have to have some wording of your own in the same sentence where the quote appears. The rule about dropped quotes are as follows. If a quote appears all by itself as a sentence in your paper with no wording of your own in that same sentence, you've dropped it. And serious points are deducted from that error. If the works cited information is given to you on the actual final exam, then you must create a separate works cited page. Otherwise, you'll again have points deducted. So remember to place your works cited page on a separate page and to put the words works cited up at the top in the center. You don't need page on there, not works cited page. You don't need references. That's not MLA, that's APA. Works cited. You don't have to underline it. You don't have to embolden it. Just works cited. And be sure that you use a hanging indent in all of your works cited entries. And you should only have one this time around, luckily. So this means that the first line of your entry will not be indented, but the second line and any other remaining lines of that entry should be indented 5 spaces. So it's exactly the opposite of a normal paragraph. With a normal paragraph, we do indent the first line, but we don't indent any of the other lines in a paragraph. A works cited entry in MLA is just the opposite of that, and that's how I learned the rule. Your short paragraph response will be graded according to the English 1020 rubric, and that is found at the very end of this document. And so adequate means that you've made a passing grade, and inadequate means that your paragraph failed for that particular section. And obviously, the more adequate your paragraph is, then the higher your grade. And you'll see that here in just a moment when we get to the end of this sheet. I do have some final exam policies, end of the semester policies that I want to quickly review with you as well. So final grades in this class, and for all your classes, can be found by going to your My Pellissippi, and I believe there's actually a section there that says final grades. While we professors are responsible for submitting final grades into the system, we're not the ones who are responsible for allowing you to see them in My Pellissippi. We don't have anything to do with that. We just submit the grades into our system. But rather, the higher powers of the IT world at Pellissippi manage all of that. Generally, though, your grades will become visible to you a day or two after we have posted them. And we do have deadlines by which we have to post the final grades. So if you were to email us and ask us exactly when those grades are going to appear, we can't answer the question for sure, because as I say, we're not in charge of that part of the process. We upload the grades into the system, and then someone else in IT makes them visible to you guys. So please do not email me also asking for your grade on the final exam or for the class, since I will be inundated, and I mean we are inundated in English classes with grading, making sure grades are calculated correctly, posting them for about 100 people. And we just simply do not have time to meet our deadlines and respond to individual inquiries there. So I ask that you understand. I mean, this last week, just before finals and during finals, we sometimes work 12-hour days, 14-hour days. We work weekends. We don't exercise. We have no life. I mean, it is really, really intense. Note that you can see your current running grades for all the assignments in the class so far by going to grades in our Brightspace course page. Grades are calculated by the Brightspace system. However, I, being an old person, also keep a separate hard copy of grades that I manually enter all along the way, and I double check the calculations between my hard copy and Brightspace to make sure that there aren't any errors there. I do go in and double check, and so it's a good idea for you to also be aware of your grades and to be going in and checking, because it's possible for little errors to be made, but I actually check more than once. I know that grades are important for you, and so I try to make sure that they are correct. For paper 3, note that I will be using editing marks only in the grading process this time around, rather than full detailed comments as I always have in the past on major papers. The reason being that we have to get through the grading of a little over 100 papers, as I say, in all 4 sections before the finals happen. And therefore, we just don't have time on these final major papers to comment thoroughly as we've done with papers 1 and 2. And so you can certainly use the proofreading marks and abbreviations that I will use in grading your paper sheet, sorry for the long title there, to decipher the meaning of those editing marks. And you'll find that on our Brightspace page. Go to Content and then to Course Documents, and then look for the proofreading sheet. So for example, if you've written a comma splice, I'll put CS for comma splice. If you've written a fragment, I'll put FRAG, period. So it'll be editing marks rather than full-fledged comments. And finally, I just want to let you all know that I've really enjoyed having each one of you in class this semester. I know that it's been a challenging one for you with everything online. I thank you for hanging in there with me. If I can do anything to be of help to you in the future, please do not hesitate to email, and hopefully to visit me maybe in the fall when the world finally returns to normal, and it will. And if you need a literature class as an elective, I am teaching English 2120, which is modern American literature, in the fall. And it is an asynchronous online class, but it is one of my very favorite, in fact, it's my most favorite class that I teach, and I'd love to have you if it's something that you need. So do take a look at that little English 1020 rubric for the final exam assessment paragraph, and the 3 things that we're primarily looking at would be to understand and write about character in a literary work, if that is, it is focused on character traits, and as I say, it normally is. And then quoting or paraphrasing from the assigned readings correctly, and then punctuating the title of a short story correctly, so quotations only. Those are the 3 main things we're looking at, in addition to just elevating language and no typos and not misspelling words, and using punctuation and sentence structure correctly and not dropping quotes. So thanks for your patience, and do tune in as well to the final exam practice run video. Have a great day.